A vida é cheia de coisa ruim, é cheia de sofrimento, é cheia de dor, é cheia de angústia, é cheia de injustiça. Já parou pra pensar que coisa bonita, coisa boa que é transformar sangue, ódio, dor em coisa boa? Eu vou conversar aqui com Peter Thum, que é uma pessoa que transforma armas de guerra em joias, que transforma armas de guerra em bijuteria, em canetas. Por exemplo, ele me deu de presente aqui essa pulseira, que era uma AK-47. Ó, isso aqui foi uma AK-47. Aqui está o número de série do AK-47 e reverte parte da renda para ajudar em projetos sociais. O Peter vai falar um pouquinho sobre quem ele é, o projeto dele e como funciona.
My name is Peter Thum. I'm the founder of two companies that are operating right now. One of them is called Foundry 47, the other is called Liberty United. And I've been an entrepreneur for over 15 years. The first company that I started was called Ethos Water, and that company was a bottled water company that when people bought the product, they were funding water access for people in developing countries around the world, people who didn't have access to clean water and sanitation. And I had decided to fund that project, create Ethos Water, because I had been working in South Africa and had met people who didn't have clean water access. And then I had this idea that I could create a competitor to Evian and Fiji, waters that people buy because they come from distant places that are supposed to be fancy. And instead I would buy the water from a local spring, and then all of the money that was saved from doing that would be then invested in water programs. And so Starbucks bought that company from us in 2005, and now water has been given to over 500,000 people around the world. More than $14 million has been invested in projects in those countries in Latin America, Africa, and Asia. And while I was visiting our programs that we had funded in Africa for water, I met little kids who had assault rifles, and it occurred to me that maybe I could try and find a way to transform these guns into something that would be inspiring and beautiful and make people want to help get rid of guns in conflict regions in Africa. And so we focused on the AK-47. This is an AK-47 clip. We started trying to figure out how do you get AK-47s out of African war zones, because it's actually not legal to do that. And so we had to get these guns from people who were in conflict regions, destroy them, and then bring them out of Africa, and then find people to make them into things. So we partnered with jewelers and watchmakers, and now we're making pens. We use that business to take profit from the business and finance the destruction of weapons in Africa. Now at this point we've destroyed more than 70,000 assault rifles in conflict regions in the Democratic Republic of the Congo and Burundi. In 2013 we launched another company called Liberty United here in the United States that does something very similar. We partner with police departments in Philadelphia, Chicago, New Orleans, and in New York State. They give us guns that they have in their evidence rooms that have been destroyed, and we then transform those into steel, and we take that steel and make it into products like this bracelet. Every product that we make has the serial number of a gun on it. It incorporates material from a gun that's been destroyed like this. Here in the US, we fund programs for kids who are growing up with gun violence in these cities that we've partnered with.
Você acha que ter uma arma te deixa mais seguro?
This conversation has been going on in the United States for quite a while. We have a similar discussion about firearms and availability of firearms, and people who are not criminals wanting to be able to get firearms so that they can, in theory, protect themselves against people who may seek to do harm to them or rob them. The research on this topic in the United States that exists demonstrates that owning a weapon, in fact, does not make a person safer. That doesn't mean that there aren't instances in which people use firearms to protect themselves when they're in a threatening situation. However, in the United States, we have 5% of the total population of the planet, and we have 50% of the guns. That doesn't make any sense. There's probably a very similar situation in terms of people wanting to own guns in Brazil, but I think that they maybe overestimate their ability to use a firearm to protect themselves, only because a normal private citizen doesn't spend all of their time thinking about defending themselves.
Oh God.
Most of their time is spent on other things. People who are criminals, when they're intent upon committing a crime, are very focused on what they're doing, and their gun is a tool like a hammer is to a carpenter. The level of preparedness, I think, plays a big role in whether or not that firearm that's meant to be a defensive tool actually ends up helping someone in a situation that's dangerous. Unfortunately, here in the United States, and I can't speak to this situation in Brazil, a lot of money and effort has been invested in convincing people example, that having guns makes you safer because gun manufacturers and people who like guns want more guns to be sold and purchased and used. From a health perspective, that's not in the best interest of the people who live in those houses or people who visit those houses. And it's probably quite likely to be very similar in Brazil.
Você acha que os fabricantes de arma hackearam nossa democracia?
I think a very clear demonstration of the public will and politics and how money has intervened in politics is here in the United States, where following mass shooting events, particularly shootings that happened about 5 years ago at the school in Newtown, Connecticut.
There are 27 victims, 20 children, 7 adults.
He came with a bulletproof vest and 4 guns, including 2 semi-automatic handguns and possibly an assault rifle, say authorities.
Many children were shot to death, and there was a public outcry that said we should pass legislation to prevent people from having certain weapons, create greater controls for firearms, and public opinion increased above 80%. The United States Congress didn't pass any legislation limiting firearm access by type or for specific people or introduce any waiting periods. They tried, but that legislation failed. Failed because the relationship between business, the financing of campaigns, and the pressure of special interests meant that the desires of the public weren't realized by the activities of the politicians. That's because special interests and money intervened and stopped that from happening.
Uma vez eu estava filmando um documentário Quebrando Tabu. Eu filmei no depósito de armas da Polícia Civil do Rio de Janeiro e alguns policiais foram acusados de estar revendendo as armas apreendidas para criminosos. O processo foi em julgamento, a gente colocou inclusive um aviso no filme e eu perguntei para o Peter o que ele tinha a dizer a respeito dessa experiência.
Here in the United States, the way that this process works is that weapons are collected by law enforcement agencies while they're doing their jobs. Those weapons might be involved in a crime, they might be collected in a sweep of a specific area. They might be collected while the police are serving a search warrant and these weapons come in. Sometimes those weapons go back to the people who legally own them. Oftentimes those weapons are collected in the evidence room, and then once they're no longer involved in an active case, those weapons are, in many cases, in most cases, they are destroyed. The police department will go and get an order from the judge, and then they will take those weapons and destroy them in any number of different ways. That serves a specific purpose to the degree that these weapons have reached the end of their utility for the people who had them, who were using them for criminal purposes. They've been taken away from those people and they're sitting there and they're costing cities money. Having those weapons no longer exist is a part of the service that the police provide to the public.
Peter, qual que é a importância do seu trabalho?
I think the importance of what we're doing is there are multiple aspects of it. One very obvious aspect is that our existence brings attention to this topic. And so the fact that we are spending the effort to obtain this gun material once it's been destroyed and then transform it into something that is beautiful gets interest from people who are creating media products, people who run newspapers and television stations and radio stations. And the topic of whether or not guns should exist is in the public eye and in people's minds, more so than it would have been had we not done what we've been doing. I think another aspect which people focus on more often is what are the actual mechanics of what we do, where we're taking firearm material, transforming it into something, and then making it into something where it generates funding, which can then be used to finance the destruction of more guns. In the case of Africa, we've destroyed more than 70,000 assault rifles, and here in the United States, we've destroyed more than 5,000 firearms, and then those guns are used to make these products, and then we take the money from those programs and invest it in programs for kids. I think the important thing about the mechanics is that the lives of many people have been saved by the removal of these firearms from circulation. The lives of these kids, who would in many cases either be the victims or the perpetrators of crimes, are being invested in, and so these kids have, because of the programs that we invest in, opportunities to get exposed to things, to do things, to get training, to get education that otherwise wouldn't happen. And in certain cases, those experiences will contribute to those kids going on to do things in their lives that they might not otherwise have done, that will be positive for them and for the society where they live. I think that the last aspect of this is that we are offering an alternative path to the idea that there are only people who like guns and people who don't like guns, and that there isn't much you can do other than vote or complain. That there's a specific mechanism by which people can actually do something, buy something, and make a statement about what they believe that didn't didn't exist before we started doing what we're doing.
Esse foi o episódio sobre o Peter Thum e os projetos dele que transformam armas apreendidas em zonas de guerra em joias e revertem parte dos lucros em projetos sociais. Isso é parte de um setor chamado 2,5. A gente vai fazer um episódio já sobre o setor 2,5. Se vocês quiserem saber mais sobre o projeto do Peter, tem o link na descrição. Se você curtiu, dê like, compartilhe, comente. Aqui estão os vídeos da semana passada. Aqui tem um episódio que eu gosto muito. Espero que vocês tenham curtido. É isso, é nóis. Semana que vem tem mais.